Hey guys, Level Cap here, and I'm really excited about today's video. It's been a long time since I've done anything to resemble more of a podcast style format, and it was a lot of fun making today's video. I got to sit down with somebody who I've been a fan of for a long time, BoredGamer. He makes daily Star Citizen content and has done so for about 6 years now, which is crazy to think about. He's a great resource for all things news on Star Citizen, and if you're just looking to be entertained on a daily basis about what's going on in the Star Citizen universe or some cool topics, he makes absolutely phenomenal content, so check him out. I'll put a link to his channel in the video description, and without further ado, let me cut over to the actual podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've got tons of questions and things that I think you could provide an interesting perspective on. The idea behind this podcast thing, if you will, is to sort of have the new player experience versus your veteran player experience and kind of like talk about the differences, where the game's going, how I feel about the game versus how you feel about the game.
Okay.
So I thought I would get into sort of my transition from complete scrub to basic noob, if you will. Just some of the first things that I found coming into the game. I still definitely have that shock and awe mentality of Star Citizen, and I don't know if that's going to go away. I still, when I land on a planet or see a sunset coming up, it's still like this moment where I'm like, okay, turn off the UI and just enjoy it. You know, it's like,
I'd say that you've actually transitioned not into a Star Citizen noob, but into a Star Citizen tourist.
Okay.
Because you've got the shock and awe still there. You've got the interest still there. You know a bit more about what's going on, and you want to experience the cool and new things, but you wouldn't be able to sort of run off by yourself necessarily and have a great experience without being told what's going on or being guided somewhat, or you'd get into a position where you'd be like, well, these bugs are preventing me from playing. How do people play this game?
Yeah. And that's been part of the new player experience. And I have sort of a weird hybrid version of that because I've been streaming the game a bit and sort of letting people see how much of a noob I am. And at the same time, many players in my chat are much more experienced with the game than me. And so they'll be like, okay, well, you're actually running into a bug right now. Or like, here's what you need to do in this mission because it's not properly explained or it's not intuitive. And so that's been helping me a lot. And I do wonder a lot of the time, like, would I even muscle my way through this if I didn't have, a couple hundred people in chat being like, okay, so go left here and then your UI's bugged out, so you have to hit that. And I will say, yeah, the navigational bugs and the UI stuff, I think the challenging part of this game is knowing when the bugs are slowing me down or when I'm actually even experiencing a bug. Because sometimes the UI won't work and I'll be like, well, I must not be doing something right. And then chat's like, oh no, your UI is bugged out right now. I'm like, oh, okay. And like knowing when there's a bug versus when I'm just screwing up is like one of the more challenging things right now.
Is it a bug or is it me misinterpreting a feature? So really, we don't talk about the player experience in Star Citizen because it's terrible for solo new players.
Yeah,
it's a lot better than it used to be.
For sure,
to an extent. I mean, so there aren't in-game tutorials for Star Citizen, and that's what the current problem is. It's because the game's still being built out. It's still an alpha, and most of the stuff where I'm clearly defending Star Citizen here, I will go back to it is an alpha. Unfortunately, you have to give it quite a lot of leeway because they just haven't done that yet. Although it is sort of a live product. Now, there is a guide system on the website. There are...
I found it actually just like a few days ago. I'm like, oh, that's nice. Luckily, there's tons of really great YouTube tutorials, some of which you've made, and just good onboarding experiences. And I've watched some of them. I mean, it's like... I keep having to remind myself that this game is kind of a sim at its core, and like very few sims are you going to just hop into and like be having fun right away. Like if you get any sort of flight sim game, well, you're probably going to go through quite a bit of manuals and YouTube videos before you're even like, okay, well, here's how I turn on the airplane and take off. Like it takes a while just to get to that point. And I realize Star Citizen isn't trying to be that hardcore, but it still has many of those elements. And as an alpha, I understand that it doesn't make sense totally to create like this highly polished onboarding experience just yet, because I assume that experience is going to be quite different as the universe expands and new features get integrated. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, I mean, it would certainly be nice to get some fresh blood in here and enjoying the game, because I can only imagine how many people boot up the game at this point and are just like, oh, yeah, this is rough.
Yeah, having a hard entry level to its simminess is not by design at the moment, for sure. It's you need a friend to take you through it. You need an organization to play it with you and tell you how to play, or watch as you said, a tutorial video, really. But like the star map, that sort of stuff, can be very tricky to navigate. Yes. Where are you going? Why are you going there? Is it working? Why can't I travel to this destination?
Is it final design, or are they going to overhaul the navigation system? Because I'd say, like, now that I feel like I understand at least 90% of the navigation system, it doesn't feel particularly well designed.
That is completely accurate. It is not well designed. It is one of the biggest problems I have with Star Citizen, and I would say that a big problem that a large percentage of the current players of Star Citizen have. They are currently overhauling and reworking the star map. I think they're supposed to be integrating the sort of Galactopedia, which is like a huge encyclopedia of in-game stuff, with that. So you could find out a load of information with things, but the general UI, and I think they've even got sort of maps that you can actually wheel down into proper mini maps and that sort of stuff, or at least maybe not mini maps, but much more detailed 3D maps of areas, and you'll be able to, the idea is roll down all the way to a planet's surface.
Okay, now, that's really good to hear, because at the moment I'm just sort of, I mean, I don't know, we could talk all day about the problems with the UI system and the navigation system, but having some sort of Google Maps, if you will, built in, where it's like, I need a station that sells X, Y, and Z. How do I find that? Oh, I have to go to an outside website and look it up.
Talking about outside websites and Google Maps and stuff, there was my radar did Star Citizen weather for a time on their moons.
Oh, really?
As part of their weather app. Yeah, because the guy that runs that is a big fan of Star Citizen. So he was doing stuff like that, and hopefully they can be integrated together. But when it comes to the star map and the features and stuff like that we're talking about, there is some problems, and that is time. How long is it going to be before the star map is in a good position? And how is the implementation actually going to look? Because the plans may be very different from the reality when it's in our hands.
Yeah. And so that is an interesting thing too, is like the star map and navigation system seems like the number one feature that you would want finished initially, like getting into the game, like how am I going to navigate a star universe? And it is interesting to see, like the pyro system gets me really excited. All these new planet techs, atmospheric techs, all this stuff. And I know they have a giant team working on all these different elements simultaneously, but it seems like, navigation should be a pretty big priority just for making the universe easier for more players to get into. But I don't know if that's the motivation of the team at the moment. I get that their motivation is largely focused on Squadron 42 and like getting core elements working. So like as a player, I'm like, gosh, I really wish they would kind of polish up these basic UI elements versus like working on an entire new system first, but
yeah, I see what you mean. So the Squadron 42 focus is incredibly important because it will represent the core of the game being completed. That will have all the basic sort of combat and physical components and all of that basic functionality that you would want in a flight sim-ish type game, but also all that combat, and then the persistent universe can be balanced and a lot more people can be technically working on the persistent universe, or at least those core concepts are in the persistent universe and then can be sort of have gameplay expanded upon that. However, there are studios working on things like the star map now, even though the lion's share of the development is on Squadron 42, there's still a good amount working on the persistent universe.
Yeah, and I should mention for anyone who's like not intimately familiar with Star Citizen, so Squadron 42 is the single player component of the game, and the PU is the persistent universe, which is the MMO online component of the game. And I believe you can get them separately.
You can, indeed.
Is that how it's sold now?
Yeah, so you can buy them separately. Sometimes you can buy Squadron 42 as a sort of like optional upgrade to your Star Citizen package as well.
Gotcha.
But they are effectively two separate games.
It's supposed to integrate in a certain way, right? Like if you beat the campaign, you might get a few cool things in the persistent universe or something like that, right?
So the way Cloud Imperium have described it is that you have sort of like a diary. Your character can be your character from Squadron 42 in the persistent universe, and you get access to maybe military equipment or sort of different people or different reputations based on your path and what you did in Squadron 42. So like one of the ships that people desperately want is the F-8 Lightning Heavy Fighter. The way you get access to that will be to complete or get to a certain point of the Squadron 42 campaign, and then you'll be able to access it in some form in the persistent universe. Although people will be able to get them in other ways as well.
Sure. Piracy. Stealing them from somebody who has one.
And concierge as well. So I do want to point out that people that spent like $25,000 on the game do sort of have access to those as well. It's one of the...
Okay, but not yet, right? That's still kind of locked probably until Squadron 42 comes out, I would imagine.
It was sort of supposed to be just like a good looking skin for them, but it is also the ship as well. And it's not going to give them like a huge advantage because people that play Squadron 42 will be able to get them and you'll be able to get them in other ways. I just sort of want to point it out that there is a bit of FOMO in the Star Citizen sort of funding model, but also rewarding
for whales. Sure. You know, it is funny, like it's like I think I bought the Carrack when it was first announced in concept, you know, and that wait was a very, very, very long time to the point where I basically forgot that I bought the ship, you know, like years and years and years. And then when it came out, like the ship is probably one of my favorite ships in the universe right now. Yeah. It's just amazing. It has all these opportunities, but it is an interesting thing where you buy something so long ago and you're like totally inspired by the concept, and then it comes out and you're like, oh, this actually lived up to what I had initially imagined, perhaps even exceeded it to an extent.
I bet you haven't even explored half that Carrack or can't remember it because it's pretty big.
Oh yeah. No, I was walking through some of the storage bays and I was like, is there another storage bay after this bay? Like, wow, this is really cool. Yeah. And then the first time exploring that, Reclaimer, is that the name of the ship? The massive salvage ship? Yeah, that one is so cool. Like that, I think that was the first big scale ship they put in the game, and just walking through it and exploring all the corridors. It's you get why the game is funded on ships, because they're just so cool. I mean, you could build a whole single player campaign around just flying a single one of those ships around because they're so detailed, so well thought out.
Well, I'm hoping that they basically become mission areas for a lot of things, like having just a wrecked ship as a huge scale FPS mission. Fantastic.
Yeah. And actually, so that was one of the things I did on stream recently was the 890 jump mission.
Yeah.
Where you get a distress signal. It says by the company that own the 890 jump, they're under attack by pirates. The ship's disabled. You have to go in, stop the pirates, and as a bonus, you can stop their data transmission in a certain period of time as well. I thought that was really cool because I had actually never explored the 890 jump before, which is a massive ship, way bigger than I thought it was going to be. You can go through an airlock on the outside. You could land your ship in the docking bay if you wanted and just come out guns blazing. There's a bunch of different ways to approach the mission. Of course, the AI were lobotomized as far as I could tell.
Yes, indeed. That sometimes happens. Sometimes they function a lot better, but they're still not great even at their best.
Yeah, and one of the features that's coming in is AI meshing at some point, either this year or next year, I think.
So,
which
the AI
might
meshing
fix that.
Partially. I mean, there's a couple of things. The AI need just general improvement. AI meshing's more for pathfinding, as I understand it, and then being able to move between ships, planets, and planet surfaces, and be able to smartly find paths around things.
Okay.
But server issues can cause the AI to be lobotomized in the way you described as well. So as server degradation sort of hits it. So there's actually a storm going on at the moment that causes them to be a lot worse than they should be.
Interesting. Okay. And so that'll probably be more related to the server meshing stuff that they're going to implement relatively soon-ish,
well,
according to...
That's the hope. So we've got
Yeah.
Server meshing and sharding.
They've been talking about that since like almost, the first couple of years of development, right?
Yeah, because they want to have a massively multiplayer online game rather than a incredibly small instantized portion of a game that's playing out a sort of all over the place. So Cloud Imperium have server meshing as their sort of a solution to this, which is coming in two parts. Static server meshing, which is what we might get if we're very lucky as good little backers by the end of the year. And that's what the sort of, if the stars align, the hope is Alpha 4.0 coming out at the end of the year with Pyro, with server meshing, static server meshing, and a bit more there as well. But so static server meshing is, at the moment, they can have 50 players in a server. They could probably upscale that, but they're sort of building a load of this stuff out still. So they want to have individual planets and areas of space all run by their own servers rather than the whole Stanton system run by just one server.
I got to say, it is impressive that they can still run the whole system on one server, because despite the 50 player count, the idea that they're tracking 50 players on planets that are hundreds of thousands of miles away from each other, in Atmo, on planet, in subterranean caves, in space stations, it's still impressive what they've done on a single server. It's kind of crazy.
Well, this is because of about 6 or 7 years, or probably 6 years, we'll say, of networking tech building up to that. Because when they first had this, it could be very slow, very crunchy. Servers would degrade to a point where you couldn't move.
Oh, yeah.
Rubber banding, server crashes all the time.
No, I remember just trying to try out multi-crew stuff when it first came out, and you're like, we're on the same ship together, and then somebody would teleport through a wall and the ship would explode or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's best possible scenario.
Yeah. And so now it's 99% successful. Where you can pop onto somebody's ship and have a really amazing multi-crew experience. And it's pretty impressive what they've done. And I think there's so many bits of tech in the game now. I think you could easily take for granted especially if you popped into the game now and you compared it to how far the game has come.
But so that's the thing, is that a lot of people just look at where Star Citizen has to go. And there's a huge way to go. But where it's come from and where it is now, the game is so much more playable than it's ever been and is pretty good fun. You could argue that there's not enough gameplay there to keep you busy for more than a few dozen hours, unless you're in an org or have got stuff planned. But I love Star Citizen. I've played thousands and thousands of hours of the game, and I love covering it.
Well, and I think that's a good segue also into sort of another topic I wanted to bring up, which is the design of the persistent universe. There's two kind of there's a billion paths you can take in terms of gameplay, but I break it up into two chunks, which is the game design missions and specific tasks that are built up for you to do. And then the emergent content, which is I'm going to go explore something and maybe I'll run into other players and I'm going to create my own adventure. And I think there's definitely much more in terms of emergent content. And I think that is sort of the plan long-term with the game. But one of the things that I've been enjoying so much about the game right now is just exploring planets. And I'm it's almost funny. I'm thinking Star Citizen, screw that. How about Planet Citizen? The planets are so beautiful, so amazingly rendered, and so stupidly massive. I mean, a single moon, not even a planet, a single moon in this game has got more surface area than any other game out there, in its entirety, right? The actual volume of the world is just so massive. Part of me is wishing that okay, we're all excited about Pyro and stuff, but there's so much space, so much area to build up and do things. And is there really in-depth long-term plans with just planets and building out things to do on a planet surface? Could I have most of my experience planet side and only spend 10% of it in space, maybe delivering things that I harvested or found on a planet?
So that's a really good question. And the truth of that is I don't 100% know if you can just live planet side permanently. However, Cloud Imperium are building out bases for planets, and you will be able to live in systems where there's no UEE presence, and UEE is sort of the human empire. and where there's no other presence other than sort of like players and danger. So no infrastructure there. So the assumption is, you'll be able to live planet-side, you could build bases, and you can have bases that exploit the sort of materials there. You can store stuff there. We don't know what form of crafting there's going to be in the game, but there is planned to be crafting and planned to bases are supposed to have uses.
Yeah, I have to say I've been pretty impressed, and not that I'm a miner, but I've been pretty impressed with what they've done with the gameplay loops for what would traditionally be thought of as kind of mindless, boring ways to play a game. I played a lot of EVE Online back in the day, and when you mined, I still love EVE. It's got a place in my heart, you know, but mining in EVE was like target an asteroid, hit the mine button, and then wait until the asteroid's gone or your cargo bay's full of whatever you're mining. So there wasn't any skill or nuance to it. And comparing that to what they've done in Star Citizen, I mean, like the difference between somebody who knows what they're doing mining and somebody who's kind of relatively noob to it is massive. The speed at which you'll mine, the efficiency at which you mine, the fact that you'll be able to mine certain minerals because you know how to operate your mining laser better than somebody else, and the tech behind it is really cool. I love that they've done that, and it makes me excited for the other types of gameplay loops that don't involve, like, you know, combat or piracy. Like,
Star Citizen are specifically looking at it from an active gaming point of view, whereas EVE Online, as your example there, incredibly passive, or at least that particular aspect of EVE mining, mostly passive, because you can argue that EVE Online actually has quite an active and an intense combat mechanic. But Star Citizen, very active all the time. You need to be there. You can't just be AFK. You can't be traveling from one place to another in a set loop that you've set or whatever. You could get interdicted. You could get attacked. When you're mining, you've got to be managing your mining lasers and things like that.
Do they have, I only think about it now because I played a little bit of, what was that latest MMO? The New World? Is that what it's called?
New World or Lost Ark, the two newer ones.
Yeah. So I enjoyed a bit of New World, and I found myself surprisingly really enjoying just hunting and chopping down trees and that kind of stuff. There was something really therapeutic about it, even though I come from a competitive FPS, kill everything around me type background. I find myself enjoying those types of gameplay loops if they're done well. And New World was relatively simple, but it made me think, you know, I know they're planning for more flora and fauna on these planets. Could there be something like hunting in Star Citizen? Have they mentioned anything like that?
Well, there are definitely dangerous alien animals.
Yes, the sandworm. When's that coming?
Well, that's on Layer 3. One of the questions I get asked most on my channel is when sandworm. So
that video is just too cool. They're like, and you'll see this in 7 years, you know?
Yeah, but it was built to be cool. When we have Layer 3, I suspect we will have that sandworm crawling about somewhere and them be terrifying. But they've got plans in the shorter term for a microtech Yeti, because we've got Planet Microtech in game, but there's going to be a genetically modified Yeti type creature there. They've got the Zyphopods, which are like basically flying space rats, which you'll see just all around the verse. When you've got Pyro, there's these big Cthulian crabs. And they're working on all of this now. It's not something they've got planned for the future.
And are there plans to interact with the animals and like either they'll attack you? I already know attacking is going to be a part of it, where like you'll have to defend yourself. But what about hunting them for, like, you know, spice, if you will?
Maybe.
Or,
I'm hoping there is a crafting or a system where I can murder these animals for missions and then harvest them. So one of the other things is there's going to be giant space whales on Crusader, which sort of float in the gas giant and breach the surface.
Oh, I love that.
And you're supposed to be able to like mine barnacles or space ambergris or something off them when they come out of they sort of breach out of there. That's the sort of idea. But as with Star Citizen, we don't know what form of implementation this will take. They sort of talked about it. It's iterative. They'll sort of see what's viable as they sort of go forward. And I know that's not going to be something that everyone wants to hear, but that is the sort of the truth and
It does sound cool though. I love these new gameplay loops that are like so much more detailed than your typical MMO. and just shown off with the mining and stuff. So it makes me wonder, okay, well, what could hunting be in Star Citizen? What could all these different sort of resource gathering loops be in Star Citizen? And with that in regards, I know they're doing a big trading overhaul this year is the plan. Is that correct?
So big cargo overhaul this and in the next patch as well, just before that. So that's coming middle of the year. Next patch, we've got more expanded selling. So you can sell all the gear that you like loot off people's bodies and FPS gear, and stuff that you find in crates and loot containers, to shops as well. So they're sort of expanding out the economy, and they're expanding out more things you can do with cargo and piracy and looting and all this sort of jazz as well.
Gotcha. What is the, I've found that to be somewhat difficult or tedious in its current state. Is there a plan for like, okay, say when I landed on the 890 jump and, I took out all these mercenaries or pirates that had cool armor, and you got to drag them over to your spaceship if it has an inventory, and then transfer their armor off of them onto the spaceship because their armor weighs too much to carry it with you. So you can't pop it into your backpack. Is there plans to like make that more efficient, or is that supposed to be like, hey, if you want all this cool gear, you got to do the legwork and like drag it onto your ship? Or are there going to be things in the game where like, I don't know, a robot will follow you around that can carry a bunch of inventory. So while you're on a mission, you could load up like a little pod or something like that that'll go with you, and then you unload it onto your ship at the end.
So certain things that we're sort of aware of, crates and trolleys will be a thing. So you could potentially just, rather than having to ferry each thing back one by one, put it all in like a storage container. There might be ways of, because they want to have costs and times associated with loading and unloading. So you might be able to just take a whole ship back somewhere and then get all of the stuff stripped out for you. Like if you've captured a 890 jump, bam, take it back to somewhere. They deal with all the crew on board automatically, take all their gear off. You get paid for that. You get paid a fraction of the value of the ship. Bam, done. The thing is that beyond that, we don't really know at this stage.
Gotcha.
Star Citizen is very active, but some parts that some people find tedious, other people enjoy, or you can just pay other people to do it. Pay them some in-game money to clear out the ship for you.
So I like the time requirement for certain tasks because it adds a value to it. And I think that was an important lesson that like Eve taught me as well. Like, you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to go fly across the galaxy and have everything that I need immediately. It's like, no, you're going to have to ferry all of your ships and gear and trading assets and whatever if you want to set up camp in another system. It's not going to be a simple endeavor. And that added value to taking territory, and it created, environments and communities in certain areas of the universe. And that part of the game was really important. So I value that, I think. And I think you could definitely criticize the design without having experienced the game that puts a big emphasis on time requirements behind activities. But I am curious about certain things like having to constantly disembark your ship when you go down to a big trading hub, take a tram into the city, go interact with a console, where it's like, okay, well, I mean, the current world isn't even that annoying. Like I can just...
Well, so I'm expecting that some of the more annoying and fiddly bits will get ironed out that you can just do remotely from your Mobiglass or from other stations on your ship. But they do want traveling and sort of transit to be a part of the game as well. So some of that might be a bit annoying. You might be able to avoid it. You might not need to go to planets. You might just be able to go to the stations above them. That might make you a little bit less profit, potentially, or you might not be able to get exactly what you want, or you might have to think about how you navigate to the planet quicker rather than go from your capital ship. But it is sort of part of what they wanted for Star Citizen.
It would be interesting if you could say like, okay, well, I want to buy that laser gun, but it's only planet side. And then you could buy it and then pay an expedited fee to have it like shipped up to you. Because I think of it from like, okay, if you're just kind of a novice player and you don't have or you're getting in the game, you don't have a big bank account or anything like that yet. And you're like, well, I'm not going to pay that expedited fee. So I'm going to go down to the planet and just buy everything and shop around there and save some money. It'll cost me a little extra time, but whatever. But then as the game progresses and say you're the CEO of a massive corporation, you're like, well, I'm not going to spend my time going down to a planet.
My time's valuable, if the game, and I've got lots of money.
Exactly. Exactly. It would be neat if the game had a system in there where it's like, yeah, if you want to throw money at the problem and spend all your time doing the things that you specifically enjoy or find valuable, then you can just pay extra money to have things delivered to you in a timely manner.
We're expecting a robust economy that sort of has parts of that in it. So you go, well, actually, if you just have these goods here, we'll move them around and I can make a lot more money because they're in the space station there, or we'll deliver them to you or whatever. But times and costs associated with that will be a thing. I think what the game does need is a robust contract system that enables players to be able to set up a contract for, bring my ships over here, I'll pay you this.
Yeah.
So you don't have to bring them there yourself. You don't have to go back on that planet if you don't want to. You can just get other people to effectively do it for you that are other players. And there's a nice system for that.
I love that. It does remind me a lot of Eve, right? Where it's like, you don't have to, you can just be a miner and then like contract or like set up your stuff to sell in some station and somebody else will buy it and do all the trading for you at a massive area if you've priced it accordingly. And I could definitely I see myself as like either an elite starfighter, or maybe I'm just growing vegetables down on a planet surface and selling them at a competitive rate, and being a farmer, space farmer or something. I find all of the different gameplay loops here really interesting and appealing. So regarding one thing that I was thinking, and maybe you would know more about this, but they did that very cool gameplay demo of Squadron 42 maybe a few years ago at this point.
End of 2019?
Okay. Yeah, and it was nice. Pretty extensive, maybe like 40 minutes of gameplay or something like that. Yeah. I was extremely impressed by it. The writing, the acting in it, the world crafting of the universe. It felt very like expanse level of detail and nuance, which got me excited.
It was the end of 2017.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
It's a while ago.
So this makes me think, and I know that they've just shifted a huge portion of their dev team over to like, we're finishing Squadron 42. Like, we need to get this out the door type mentality. And they've been working on it so long. Are you expecting more of a linear story with that, or something that's more of like Elder Scrolls, where like you've got this giant world and sure, you can follow a mission arc and complete it quickly, or you can spend 300 hours in the game?
Let me give you the Squadron 42 episode 1 sales pitch. Okay. So it is a sort of spiritual successor to Wing Commander. It is very much, or at least partly on rails. You are you're in the military, and you are flying a set of missions. You are along for the ride. You influence them. But it is not an Elder Scrolls type game. There's quite a big, lot of stuff going on. But this sort of idea is that you have your briefing for a mission, which you literally have to attend on the ship. You then get to your ship. You fly out to the location that you need to do your mission, then do it, whatever, get back to your ship, have your debriefing, which you physically need to attend, and then have downtime, which you can walk around the ship and do various things and witness various things.
That sounds really interesting, actually.
Yeah, it's sort of, they want this sort of immersion that you are a military officer, you're this pilot, you're influencing what's going on, and they want, because they've got all this sort of like AAA talent. They've got from like Gary Oldman to Mark Hamill, Gillian Anderson. There's a load of these sort of like, wow, you've got all these people in a computer game, and it's sort of supposed to be this little bit film-like experience, because Chris Roberts wants to bring his film knowledge and experience and his sort of like passion to the gaming world and combine them together. Yeah,
and it looks incredible. And even the thing that they teased in 2017, and I was thinking a few years ago, right? God, time flies. But even what we saw 5 years ago, I thought was so incredibly impressive. And I was like, yep, give this to me now. I want to play this now.
Yeah, and I think you're going to be able to have sort of relationships to some extent with some of the crew, find out about their problems and things, and maybe witness certain scenes that you wouldn't on your first playthrough, maybe not your second, maybe you only see a portion of potential things that are happening with the crew every time you play and can affect that. It's a really interesting little ecosystem there. And it's really highly detailed, but very contrasted to the persistent universe, which is very, very different to that.
And is it true that they're holding back the Idris, which is a smaller capital class ship, from the persistent universe because they want the surprise and sort of the detail and the amazingness of that ship for Squadron 42, and then it'll come out in the PU?
Well, so they do exist in the persistent universe, the Idrises. People have stolen them.
But you can't fly. Oh, wait, they've stolen them?
So people have stolen them. They don't have any proper interior. They've sort of janked into them and broken into them. Same with the Javelin. So the Javelin and the Idris, originally, lots of us had thought that CIG were going to hold them back for Squadron, but they've sort of said they don't need to do that, and they might not. It's not a sort of like we are holding them back. It's, well, they're not actually ready yet, so it's not even, it's all academic.
Okay. Yeah, I did know that they were in the universe, but I meant more from players can own these and fly these, and they'll have full interiors and stuff. I am very excited to see player run Idrises, and because that might be the first ship in the game that has more of an almost carrier like role, wouldn't it? Because it's got a fairly large hangar bay.
Yeah, so the Idris's role is a frigate, but also as a carrier. It sort of can carry 4 or 5 ships. I'm sure people will correct me in the comments.
I'm sure people are going to jam pack as many ships as they can fit in there, which is what I like about Star Citizen. It's not just like a traditional space game where it's like, this ship can carry 3 fighters. It's like, this ship can carry as many fighters as you can possibly cram into it.
But maybe not safely.
Definitely not safely. But I've enjoyed seeing people cram 2 M50s into a Carrack, if you park them in a certain way, and you're like, oh, now a Carrack has got 2 little fighters that it can launch, I love that idea where it's like, this is supposed to be a single ship fighter bay, but if you're clever, you can fit whatever you want in here. I love that sort of sim aspect of it.
So I think it's an interesting thing. CIG with Star Citizen, they've gone, we want hard sim to start with, and now they've gone much more in the route of, we like sim, but we're going to gamify stuff where possible. And I think there is a nice mix now. So yeah, I want to be careful when we say sim, because I think a lot of people will look at Star Citizen and go, not sim at all. But it's got elements of that, and it's got elements of proper physics, but then it gamifies stuff as well. And it can be a bit jarring sometimes, but I actually quite like it.
I think it's the way to go, because if it's full sim, then, well, now you've got a niche audience, right? A sim is a very hard game to get into. I appreciate and respect DCS style flight simulator games because they're so realistic and cool, but also I need to read 200 pages of a combat manual before I can even do much in that game, and that makes it niche just by its specific design. So Star Citizen is such a huge game, it needs to be available and accessible to a bigger audience that doesn't want to have to read 200 pages of a manual before getting into it. And in that regards, I do have another question regarding the UI. The UI for many years now has been this sort of weird, go up to an object, hold F to see what you can do with it. And now there's a series of multiple options. Is that getting an overhaul at any point, or is that actually this is the plan going forward?
So that's an interesting question, because what you're talking about is their inner thought system, where you have a load of different options. You hold F, you can play with the object. It looks like CIG are going for something a bit tactile and a bit grabby, as well as having options that you can do with objects. So I'm expecting it to get a bit of an overhaul, but I'm not sure exactly what. Okay. Yeah, it seems like, because there's a few things where in game I'm like, well, the only thing I would ever like to do with this is open it or something, where it's I'm never going to choose another option. But yeah, that is kind of a weird element of the UI that I find makes the game feel slow and clunky and cumbersome. Yeah, so
compared to any other game where you're just pick that up, put it over there, whatever.
Well, they're moving towards much more active sort of interaction zones and buttons. So rather than 3 different things you could do with an object, it would be, well, I'm interacting with it here, I'm pushing this button on it, or I'm interacting with here, I'm opening the batteries out the back of it, and or whatever. But I still think they might need that contextual menu as well, because there might be lots of things you could do with it.
It's a tricky problem to solve, because the game the game needs, when you pick up a package, well, there's 10 things you could do with it as opposed to just like throw it, and maybe you don't want to throw it because there's certain things you can pick up in the game that are, sensitive to jostling or something like that, and you could break them. So
yes, indeed, there are.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem to solve. And it is weird at this point that I think my issue with it right now is that it's still very clunky. Like there's just so many elements of it that are super clunky where I still have a hard time getting into my Vanguard, which has been in the game for, I don't know, a long time now. And just opening the back door is like...
The clunkiness is something that they are sort of trying to solve. The player interaction experience is probably how they would deem it.
Yeah.
They do try and improve that every patch to patch. I don't think we're going to see heavy polish to elements like that would be lovely to see, but I don't think we're going to see them for quite a while until the game's much more closer to beta, in my opinion. But we'll have to wait and see.
Gotcha. There's a couple random thoughts I wrote down here that I thought you might have some better insight on. Do you know if they're going to try and... I know AI meshing is going to be a big part of making the universe feel a bit more alive, with AIs behaving and interacting in more realistic ways and having more of them on planet surfaces and stuff. Will there be stuff like NPC traffic around like space stations, like having a line of cargo ships coming in to dock somewhere? Yeah,
so they've sort of previously tried to do that and then realized, right, we'll do that in the future when we actually have the dynamic universe sim. So basically there's going to be NPCs flying around space stations as well, landing, and they are going to technically be part of this greater simulation where if you started attacking them or other NPCs attacked them, that they could die and that would disrupt some form of the economy or create missions. These NPCs are going to be flying around. You'll see them at different landing zones. You'll be able to respond to their distress signals.
And just the server tech probably isn't quite ready for it yet. Is that the idea?
It's not just the server tech. It's sort of the generation of them as a physicalized NPC and AI. So they sort of want to have these probability volumes of, in these areas, you're more likely to encounter these types of NPC and these pirates because there are this amount of traders trading this good which pirates want, and which then means that more police come to police that zone. So they've got all this sort of like statistical stuff going in the background that changes what you see and what sort of events that you get where you're flying around. And then they want to physicalize that appropriately based on those statistics. So it's all sort of built into this huge dynamic universe sim, which they went, well, we could start showing random NPCs off, but where do they go? Are you able to attack and board them?
Gotcha. It's sort of a SimCity type approach where it's like if you see a car delivering something, like it has a whole life cycle loop or whatever, as opposed to just this is eye candy.
Yeah. I mean, and who knows what they'll do first? They might go, this is going to be a lot further out than we expected, so let's put in a step towards it, which is more eye candy like, because of the nature of their development and their sort of active live product. They do go, well, actually, sometimes let's put something in the short term, and sometimes they go, well, actually, we're just going to wait for a long time because we don't want to do the work twice. And that is one of the things I don't get with Star Citizen. How do they make the decisions of what is prioritized for one path or another? Because sometimes I go, I don't know why you've made that decision, but okay.
Coming outside of the persistent universe, Star Citizen also has the Arena Commander module, which for anyone listening that isn't familiar, it's a way to access flying and fighting with spaceships in a very easy to access way where you don't have to worry about losing a ship in the persistent universe or losing your character. You can just pop in, play like sort of a team deathmatch style mode in your starfighter. Do they have any plans for expanding Arena Commander a bit further or making it more accessible?
Well, yes, they do. So they've got Pirate Swarm and Vandal Swarm in at the moment, which are the fight against NPC, pirate or alien forces, which you can do in a group or by yourself. They have Theatres of War, which I'll come back to in a second, which they're building. But there are plans to expand out Arena Commander further. They've been sort of improving some of the levels and making them a lot bigger and a lot more sort of up to date with this current tech. So you can expect updates to Arena Commander in the future, sort of expanding out exactly what you can do in that and the sort of gameplay modes for that. But I think Theatres of War is something that Clan Imperium announced, I believe, in 2019, at the end of 2019. I've played in the Eva Carti and at that original sort of Citizen Con where they had it. And it is a Battlefield style sort of objective-based game mode in the sort of Star Citizen universe, very arcadey, but at the scale of Star Citizen's planet. So you start off in this area, you have these objectives to do, you can fly down from space, you can assault this like structure, and then you move on to the next point, and you might have to assault up to a space station in orbit, and then take out the generators there, boom, you've won.
That sounds extremely cool, and I'm kind of disappointed that I missed it. I must have been like head in the clouds doing something else, because that sounds like something that I would exactly be interested in coming from a Battlefield background.
Well, you'd be disappointed because at the moment they've gone quiet on it. We know they're working on it and they want to get it out, and it hasn't been like fully canned or anything, but they went quiet on it after saying they wanted to get it out sort of in 2020 or 2021 in some form. Yeah,
when you play the game right now, it has all the assets to make a Battlefield-like game mode, right? You've got ships that are specifically designed for ground assault. You've got every kind of spaceship you could want at the moment for any sort of Battlefield style game mode. You've got ground vehicles. You've got the Nova tank. Is that what it is?
Yep.
You've got buggies. You've got hover motorcycles. You've got ballistas for anti-air support. Like, you have all the assets in the game to create a pretty probably compelling Battlefield-like experience. So yeah, whenever I played, I'm like, that would be a great way to introduce people to this game and to try and like get people familiar with the combat before you're out in the persistent universe and you're like, oh, how do I fire missiles from a ballista again? I wish I knew how to do that before, spending 40 minutes hauling this thing out to the side of the planet or something,
The other problem though, the problem with that is that they don't have their network tech is not refined enough, and we've already talked about the jankiness. They need to solve those two things before they put out Theatres of War, because Theatres of War will be compared to Battlefield. It will be compared to fully finished released games, even though it might be an alpha. So it's a hard one for Clan Imperium. I do expect them to actually do a great job with it. When I've played it, it's great. It's good fun. There are major issues, like I've just mentioned, that they need to solve first. But I am looking forward to it. Do you mind if I very quickly touch on a couple of things that we mentioned?
Yes, please.
So when you were talking about planets earlier, something that CIG are talking about a lot at the moment are rivers and roads. So
yeah, I've seen your videos on this.
Yeah. So there's something they're going to be showing off this week, the updated rivers and river tech. It's something that we're expecting to potentially see in game later this year or early next year, actually implemented on the planets. And I think that's pretty exciting for me. I love the idea of water, rivers, and just ever increasing pretty vistas on planets. And it's very similar to road tech as well, which is also pegged to be completed in some form at some point this year, and uses very similar stuff. So I think that's a big thing for me to want to see in the game, and I think it will be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm super excited about anything they're doing with the planet surface stuff. I've seen some of your videos talking about Pyro and their cave tech and doing more extreme cliff faces and that sort of thing. Yeah. Like customizing the areas a little bit more really excites me, where like an artist goes in with a paintbrush and is like, I'm going to create, Mount Everest or Yosemite or something like that. Like have some really special, spectacular looking areas. I find that really appealing. And then of course, roads are really, are cool in the sense that they can probably be used to link more interesting ground areas together. Because at the moment, it's mostly just like, here's an outpost, go there, pick up your package, kill the guys, do whatever, and then take off. There's not much like, go down the path and see the thing that's a mile away and then interact with that and then come back. Like there's not too much to do on the ground other than like mine or go to the very, very small specific mission location. So the idea of interconnecting mission stuff together is really appealing.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I wanted to touch on was server meshing again.
Yes.
So the importance of server meshing, having all of the different servers running different areas, sort of the planet and the area of space around the planet and a space station and potentially someone's ship, is that those servers then share information seamlessly with no loading, so you don't actually know you're on a different server to other people.
Yeah, and I think server meshing, like, even though the tech behind it sounds less exciting when you're talking about the nuances and details, because it's all coding and network tech and optimization, but the importance of it is basically the foundation for making Star Citizen work. Like, there's no way to make this game work without this incredibly advanced server meshing tech, and other MMOs do use it, but I believe that Star Citizen's kind of going to the next level of server meshing, in which, like, when we're in a room or a space or on a spaceship or whatever, we'll be simultaneously integrated with 4 or 5 servers, maybe even more than that at a time, for different elements of the data or world that we're experiencing.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think a lot of people think of it, well, I'm just still on one server, I'm just moving between them. Well, actually, you're sort of interacting with a load of servers, though. If a room on your ship is a server, and then the ship's the server, and then the area around the space is a server, and then multiple other ships are servers, that's quite complex.
And the inventory in your character is a different server. And
yeah, that's an interesting one, because CIG are working on sharding as well at the moment, which is sort of like a layer of redundancy and intelligently loading in and out assets to your current shard, so your current instance. But all the shards are effectively copied from the main database, the main sort of God AI, and then this is a solution for once you have too many players in an area or system, it actually creates another shard, which is different to the one you're on, but only temporarily, and it can track where your ships and your bases and where you've put a stash of weapons, but then it can intelligently load it in and out and carry it with you when you go to your next shard. So that's sort of like a step in between server meshing and what we have now, to give it a bit of redundancy as well, and sort of if you have a crash, it will just be able to have this shard already in the background copied and just be able to put it onto a new server, is the sort of idea here as well. So there's lots of clever networking tech.
God, I can only imagine the size of the brains that have to solve these problems. Once the tech is being built, and it's so impressive, but it seems like once it's in there, they can just kind of go crazy with content, And I know it's maybe getting a bit ahead of myself there, but that is mostly what Star Citizen is these days, is fantasizing about the future, right?
Well, that's the double-edged sword nature of Star Citizen's development. They've got the time and the money in the community that allow them to build out a game of their dreams. It's not feature creep when they've got the money and time to do it. However, the development time is incredibly long.
And it's funny trying to defend Star Citizen, because I think there's just so many people that are still in this camp of somehow that this game is a scam, or it's never going to be finished. And so it gets a little touchy trying to defend the game. But the way I look at it and the way I explain it to certain people who I feel are kind of a little skeptical, but not totally in the camp of this game's never coming out, is well, it's the most ambitious game plan ever by a significant margin. I'd say by 4 to 5 times more ambitious than just about anything else that has ever been developed. And there's certain games out there that are very detail rich and very expansive, I don't know, Red Dead Redemption 2 that took 8 years, I think, to develop, And so it's yes, we're past 10 years dev time. What is it, 11 now? It's pretty long, but also the game is so much more ambitious in terms of its scope, scale, and what you could do with it. I would expect it to take longer based on comparative development times for other games. And not to mention the fact that they had to build a studio and are still technically building their studio while developing the game, as opposed to starting the game with a full studio ready to go.
Not just technically expanding either. I mean, they're almost doubling their workforce in the next 3 years. They've just signed 10-year leases in a new studio in Manchester City Centre, which takes their studio that was around 400 employees all the way up to 1,000 employees.
That is wild. It is wild to think about that kind of expansion mid-game development. And I really don't envy the people in charge of those tasks. Because, I mean, you really just want to sit down at a desk and start building content, right? But, I mean, so much of the game development process is producing, right? It's the non-fun part.
It's a beautiful development of a game, warts and all. If you cover the project and you go, there are problems, there are often problems, or there's sometimes problems, but look at the amazing stuff they can do. Or it's just a fantastic drama to watch unfold. I love it. I love Star Citizen. I love the community. I love the devs.
And I think that's what has attracted me to your channel throughout the years. There's so much information coming out of this game that you can make a daily video with something that I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? I haven't thought about this thing that they mentioned 3 years ago. And then you collect all that information, put it together in a nice package, and kind of update everybody on what's been going on or what the potentials are with this system that we haven't really thought about in a while. And there's just so much information there to cover. It is quite insane. And it makes me, I almost approach making Star Citizen content with a little bit of fear, because I know there's so much information out there that if I even speculate or talk about something, somebody will be like, well, technically 5 years ago, they did say they were adding that system in. So yeah, there's just so much that it almost becomes difficult to think about the future of the game without making a misstep on what's already been said that they're doing with the game.
Yeah. It's also hard to know what the current plans are. So the development is incredibly open and detailed, but they do change their minds, and they don't always relay the plans for the changes, the context of the changes, and why they've changed it in a timely manner. It's the double-edged sword of the nature of their development. It's fantastically open, but not always perfectly communicated.
Yeah. Yeah. But I will say, in terms of the amount of information and communication coming out of Star Citizen, it's more exciting to follow than any other game in terms of just development and what they're working on.
Oh, 100%. And I could not do what I do with my channel for any other game, I don't think. You can't focus on a game like this and do a video every day for the last, 6 years? Oh my God. I've wasted my life.
What are you doing with your life? Yeah, gosh, if this game fails, oh boy.
But no, I'll still cover it. I will cover it to the bitter or triumphant end.
But I think, I'm a full believer, if you want to contextualize it that way. I'm completely in love with the concept of the game. I've put, more money than I'm willing to tell the public or my wife into backing the game. I believe in the project and the ambition of it. And it's so expansive, creative, and massive that it seems like one of those games that could be a forever game if it does, once it launches and starts getting supported regularly with a feature complete universe. It seems like, why would they need to make a competitor to Star Citizen? It just will be the game that you play.
There's a hunger. There's a hunger in the community for space games like Star Citizen or have similar elements to it. I mean, No Man's Sky and Eve and so what are the ones that are coming out? This is Starfield. I mean, just the idea of space exploration.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's going to be Elder Scrolls in space or Fallout in space. I'm glad you're sort of a believer in what you think the project can be and that sort of stuff. I take a moderately critical view when I'm not talking about the news. I will talk about I love Star Citizen, but there are pitfalls and there are problems with the development. Sometimes that's just a reality of its development. I think your content would be hugely welcomed in the community. A lot of people are chomping at the bit for new content creators to cover a bit of Star Citizen. And there's always going to be a big glut of content every quarter that comes out with a new patch. So,
well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Also, thank you so much for coming by and doing the podcast with me. I'm really excited to play more Star Citizen. Even today, I'm going to hop on and probably run some missions. But like I said in my previous video, I think we're kind of at a tipping point for the game where the immersion and the features and the cool aspect of it is just enough to start looking past the buggy nature of it and the rough onboarding experience. And I think over the next year or two, as things start to get more and more refined, we're probably going to see a fairly substantial momentum shift for the game in the persistent universe. And hopefully, if the timelines and release schedules work out, then Squadron 42 can be kind of the climax of that build up and really usher in new players to the Star Citizen universe. So again, thanks for coming by. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks very much for having me. Very much appreciated. I hope you enjoy your ventures into the verse. And if you need any help, feel free to give me a poke.